Hello everyone, welcome to the PeaceeverTV. I'm the Richard, and today we come to the IPM International Peace Institute to report issues about the rebuilding the trust of the peace and the security of the world. We welcome the 73rd United Nations Assembly, Maria, the President, and the former Minister of the Australia, Mr. Kevin here. I just want 1 minute, so I want to know what's the next plan in your future, What's your plan?
Wherever I am, I will continue to support the work of the United Nations, especially the discussion on multilateralism, especially the women in power and gender parity and women empowerment. I will continue to work on that and on the climate and plastics agenda as well.
Okay, so thank you.
Here at the IPI, and we've got lots of things to do for the next 50 years as well. We see our mission statement as supporting the UN family. We do that formally, informally, and in any other manner which the UN so chooses. Today we're here at this important gathering in UN High Level Week to debate the future of multilateralism as it relates to the future of arms control and disarmament. And therefore, we could think of no two better speakers to join us than the most recent President of the General Assembly, Her Excellency Ms. Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garces, who I'll introduce to the podium in a minute. And also a good friend, Dr. Lucina Zerbo, who is head of the Comprehensive Test Ban Organization right over there in Vienna. I'm now told reliably that Lucina is a candidate to become the next head of the International Atomic Energy Agency. So good luck, my friend, good luck. We, the IPA, are perfectly neutral on all these questions, just that he happens to be a friend of mine. So it's good to have you here with us. When we think of the future of multilateralism, we think of the role it continues to play across the full domain of activity of the UN system. And it's not just on terrorism, it's not just on combating climate change, and it's not just humanitarian crises. It covers every field of human endeavour. And that's because after the last huge war we had as a planet, we decided it was better to work with each other rather than against each other. And that was where the modern spirit of multilateralism was born. And I would hope that the international community, 75 years later, continues to remind itself of that core reason why we decided to form a multilateral order. Of course, multilateralism has historically been highly relevant to the evolution of the arms control, nuclear non-proliferation, disarmament agenda. We will all remember here, back in 1996, the passage of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. This was an important achievement for the UN system. And it was the passage of that treaty and the subsequent signature and ratification process which gave birth to the CTBTO, the organisation in Vienna, which Lucina now heads. And its work, frankly, is highly important for the future of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban and the overall work of the international family of nations in nuclear non-proliferation. So I think the way we should best proceed today is to have our two principal speakers give their own formal remarks against the question we've been set today: picking up the pieces in a fractured world, rebuilding trust in multilateralism for peace and security. Picking up the pieces is probably a premature topic, but something which is hovering closer and closer to reality, unfortunately, as we see what is happening in the whole non-proliferation space around the world today, without naming any particular region or any particular state. So to begin proceedings, if I could ask the most recent president of the 72nd, Third General Assembly, 73rd General Assembly, Her Excellency Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garces, to address us, and then I'll have great pleasure in introducing to you Lucina Serbo. Maria.
Thank you very, very much, as always, Kevin, and thank you all for being here, because I'm sure that you all face some security challenges to reach the building. There is so much movement across the street, and I'm very also happy to recognize so many familiar faces and friends here. So let me once again start by thanking the International Peace Institute and Kevin Rudd, its chairman of the board of directors, and dear Adam, and of course to pay my respects to a dear friend, Dr. Lucina Serbo, the executive secretary of CTBTO, and very happy to see also that he's a candidate for AIEA, and I wish you all the best. You have excelled as the executive secretary of CTBTO. So whatever happens, we will be in good hands. So today, basically, the question of today is multilateralism and what are the connections with CTBT. But in general, I would say the connections with the disarmament agenda. And perhaps I would like to address three questions. First, and the first question that I think that we have to ask ourselves is, why is that we feel so insecure today? And why, especially if we do have an international architecture that has norms and laws and frameworks on practically every aspect of human life and the environment. And I think we have to accept the fact that we do live in a world of stress, of insecurity, of mistrust. And perhaps that's where the pieces that Kevin was referring to, we can find these pieces that really conform an atmosphere of insecurity and of lack of trust. And I have seen figures and numbers recently, and they don't look good. People around the world do feel insecure for different reasons. And I think that recently also security has taken new proportions, new dimensions. And the reason why we feel insecure is because we are witnessing the weakening of our social contract, of our international rules-based order, the Paris Agreement, the trade rules, the human rights architecture, the hard-won disarmament accords, such as the JCPOA or the INF. It's all kind of falling apart. And perhaps now I have a little more freedom, that because I am the president of the previous session of the General Assembly. But we are witnessing, indeed, a proliferation of conflicts, and we are also witnessing our lack of capacity to reach agreement through the existing international schemes, such as, for example, the UN Security Council. It is not a secret to you all, but we are also witnessing a climate emergency that is destroying countries' livelihoods, ecosystems at an unprecedented rate. And we are here across the street from, I would say, the most powerful ever climate summit in terms of the number of heads of state and government. So, and it is not only the climate crisis, it is hate speech, religious intolerance, xenophobia that has caused hundreds of deaths only this year. And I cannot start by counting, the victims of Christchurch, of Sri Lanka, of the synagogue in California, San Diego. And this is connected to some social unrest. If you look at the figures of unemployment is on the rise, but also the number of the working poor are also on the rise. Cybersecurity has become one of the main concerns in our countries, both North and South, East and West. I think that the very definition of security has become a complex web of interconnected factors that brings together economic, social, environmental determinants. And at the same time, the international community was able to design, in the midst of all of this, our sustainable development goals that perhaps are the most comprehensive and ambitious blueprint of our times. The challenge is now how to deliver, how to implement Agenda 2030, and especially when we are facing financial, technological challenges, but above all, I think we're also facing a deficit in political will, in global leadership, and international solidarity. And I want to address that. We are facing a deficit on international solidarity. And sustainable development and peace and security go hand in hand. I don't need to convince you of that because it is very easy to explain. And I think that they're both mutually reinforcing. So the first question, why do we feel insecure, and what is the kind of world and international atmosphere that we're living in? The second question is, in this environment of anxiety, of insecurity, of mistrust, whether or not the predictability, the trust on international law, and if international law is trustworthy and predictable, I think it's a question that we should ask ourselves, especially when we're looking about CTBT and other very important disarmament instruments. If we look at the Paris Agreement, the Global Compact on Migration, the Human Rights Council, the WTO rules, the arms control instruments, and these are just few examples that I would like to mention in terms of saying we are weakening this capacity that we had to reach agreement on the fundamentals. And we are seeing long-established international laws and multilateral practices which have delivered so much in the past 73 years, devalued, and why? Because of geopolitical tensions, unilateralism, ad hocery on some decisions that are taken. And we are seeing, and I have traveled the world this year, but what we see is a growing disconnect between people, governments, and institutions. And I think that this is a very much, a huge governance challenge that we have. I think that people out there, regular people in the street, they expect us to keep the promises that we have made through the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, but through the Paris Agreement, through our disarmament commitments, and I think that they are losing faith on our capacity to deliver. And I think that the frameworks that we have been able to shape, from the promotion of human rights, gender equality, regulation of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons, I think all these frameworks have provided incredibly successful outcomes. Let's pick one that is one of my favorites because it was extremely successful. The Montreal Protocol, for instance, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, who in the 1960s would have thought that the number of nuclear-armed states would still be in the single digits. And this is not a victory because they should be none, but at least we can count them with our fingers, which is already something important. And I think that we are not in the position of losing the gains of the past 73 years. I think that there is growing recognition at the same time that we're facing this crisis situation, this trust deficit. I think a growing recognition that we urgently need a stronger multilateral and rules-based system to protect our global commons. And this is critical. And what are the global commons? Things that are so fundamental to our survival. Global commons such as the atmosphere, the one we all share, and that's why we're in trouble with climate change. The ocean, cyberspace, global goods, and the most important global goods are peace and security, precisely. So, as already mentioned, I think we have to face it. We are living a world of multiple crises, but at the same time, we see that our world is more interconnected, more interdependent, and yet more polarized. So I think that we cannot ignore the fact that the crises that occur outside our own borders, such as the climate emergency or violent extremism, have enormous effects and put in risk the neighboring countries, the neighborhood, the close neighborhood, but also the faraway neighborhood. And we had a meeting with 45 the most important scientists working in the Amazon. And the message was very clear. If we destroy the Amazon, it's not only bad for Amazonian countries, it's bad for the non-Amazonian countries in Latin America, but it's bad for world climate and world biodiversity. So I think that we have demonstrated also that the line between inter and intrastate conflict has been blurred, and more so. And I think that we cannot afford to be indifferent. So I think this can be seen as, of course, a crisis, but also can be seen as an opportunity if we seize it and if we work together. And the greatest challenges we face also offer, incredible opportunities to harness the creativity of youth, and we have seen during these past days, during the Youth Climate Summit, the power of women. I have worked a lot on women in power during the last year, and for example, our capability of transforming our own cities to make them more resilient, to transform our societies, our economies, the way our societies relate to nature and the environment, for example. And I think that I realize now that I have a little bit of a too long statement. I would like to close, but perhaps just to leave with you, just not this feeling of everything is bad, but we do have an opportunity here to work together. And we do have this opportunity if we take seriously the deficits that we are facing. And perhaps I will summarize. There are more, but this is an indicative list. The first deficit in our multilateral system, in my opinion, is the communication deficit. We need to find ways to communicate our work better, to provide meaningful answers to those who have lost faith in the international system, and to push back against those who peddle misinformation. And this is happening a lot. We are living the world of fake news, etc., etc. But I think perhaps the most important part of communication is something that I've been saying, and the Secretary General across the street has said. It's not only about communicating, it's not only about translating the work you do to the regular public, it is about listening. And I think that we need to listen more also. The second deficit is inclusion. And the UN, of course, we all know the UN is an intergovernmental organization. So it is clear that member states should be in the driving seat, no question. And they need to be accountable for the decision we take. But I think that we have to really come up with a clear blueprint, a clear agreement on how to include stakeholders in our conversations. It cannot be an ad hoc basis. It cannot be case by case. And I have experienced that last year a lot. Depends on the theme, depends if it's sensitive or not for country A or B, but we do need to have a predictable system to make sure that we give voice to local governments, civil society, women, indigenous peoples, youth organizations. They all must play their part. And not only as the voices to interpelar, to criticize and question and demand, which is fair enough, but also that they have a co-responsibility in finding solutions that we need. So I think that we need to establish more predictable means to include these voices. So that would be the deficit inclusion. And perhaps the third and last, there are many more, and around the room I'm sure that you can come up with many more. But the third, I would say the delivery and the action deficit. And that's why this climate summit is called the Climate Action Summit. And I think that we must expend as much effort on implementation as we do on our deliberations. I think, for example, that if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and all of the rest, I think that fulfilling our promise to save succeeding generations from war needs really, to value multilateralism in its capacity to deliver for the people. So if we see the CTBT, for example, and perhaps just to end, we just commemorated the 10th anniversary. Was it last week? Yeah, it was. Yeah. So basically, we took that opportunity to enhance public awareness, to enhance education, but also to call on the countries that were still waiting for them either to sign or to ratify. We're so close. We are so close, and this issue is so important, because we know that after 1945 we have had more than 2,000 nuclear tests that have been conducted. So it is a real threat, and it is perhaps one of the, when you say a successful treaty, it's easy, you say the protocol, the Montreal Protocol. But now I hope that one day we should be able to say the CTBT also was a success, and we have to work towards that. And I think that we have to acknowledge we are living a very dangerous period in the nuclear part, marked by really tough tensions among nuclear armed states, unfortunately. And in my opinion, there is only one way to resolve these tensions and to keep our world in peace. And the only way is dialogue and diplomacy. So we need a lot of that. I think that perhaps the CTBT can provide us with an opportunity to show that multilateralism can work and can deliver. We do need that the convention enters into force, and that's why I appreciate so much the work of the CTBTO and of Dr. Zerbo in trying to push in order to make it happen. So I think that we do have opportunities. They're there. Perhaps just next year, 2 processes that I'm sure I really would like to invite you to take part, even if we have a new president across the street. But it's very important that we all engage in the process to the commemoration for the 75th anniversary of the United Nations next year, and on the Beijing Plus 25 process on women's rights and women empowerment. I think that we really are in a juncture where we need to walk the talk. And I think the entire choreography of this high-level week is geared towards action and commitments. I have great hopes that this is what we're going to have after the end of the week. So we need to walk the talk, but something that I keep defending, we need to talk the talk, because sometimes we are accused that the UN is only a talk shop. And I'm very proud to say yes, because we do have to talk to address and solve our issues. And dialogue is the strongest weapon we have as diplomats. That's what we have. Our weapons are words. And I do believe as a poet that words have a transformative power. So we also need to be very serious about talking the talk, coming with re-energized narratives on the role and the irreplaceable role of multilateralism, of the role of dialogue, on the role of peaceful solution of conflicts, on the role of diplomacy that is becoming so important. And diplomacy is not only about diplomats and governments, diplomacy is also about civil society engagement. So I think that we can together overcome indifference, inertia, with commitment and determination. And I would just make this invitation, and I would just close with a quote. And I always forget who is the owner of the quote, who is the author of the quote, but he said, it's a Nobel Peace Laureate, literature Nobel Peace Laureate from the United States. But he said that the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference, and we cannot be indifferent. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to having more poets as President of the General Assembly in the future. Poetic imagination is something which we in the international family could have more of rather than less. So thank you, Maria, for firstly being an activist President of the General Assembly, because an activist President of the General Assembly means that you are asserting the voice of member states in a system which ultimately, as we know, has particular powers attributed to particular states, given the nature of what was agreed in the Charter 75 years ago. But also to thank you for your passionate and continuing commitment to such important challenges as plastics, and your passionate and important commitment as a strong woman President of the General Assembly to Beijing Plus 25, which is finance and women's empowerment. And we hope that you will remain engaged with these two big agendas into the future. Our next speaker today is Dr. Lucina Serbo. I've known Lucina for a long time. He's a highly effective head of the CTBTO. The CTBTO, for those of you not familiar with it, since we put through the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, we now have 184 signature states. We now have 168 ratification states. Well done, Lucina. You've got Thailand and Zimbabwe to ratify. So the number creeps up. It creeps up. But 8 states have yet to ratify. China, Egypt, India, Iran, Israel, North Korea, Pakistan, and the United States of America. It's undiplomatic to name them, so I won't. I just mentioned them, I didn't name them. But if we're going to make international law potent, it means that all member states of the United Nations must put their shoulder to the wheel. The signature achievement, I believe, of the CTBTO has been the development, enhanced during Lucina's leadership of the organisation, is the development of this comprehensive international monitoring system, the IMS. And the fact that you have 347 stations, monitoring facilities across the world, so that if anything happens, it is this independent system which forms part of our multilateral family, which provides credible, immediate, technical advice as to what has happened and where. And for example, all 6 nuclear tests by North Korea have been accurately monitored, and date, time and event given by this important institution through a mechanism in which we all have scientific trust. So Lucina, I look forward to hearing your remarks today, and after you've spoken, we'll then take to the front and take your questions from the audience. Lucina, sir.
Thank you, Kevin, my good friend. So let me thank the International Peace Institute for hosting us today, together with an effective 73rd UNPGA, Miss Maria Espinosa, whom I've known from Ecuador, because Maria was part of the process to build 2 wonderful stations of our international monitoring system facilities in the Galapagos Island. That wasn't an easy task, so and that basically put Ecuador as a country very close to my heart, because when people ask about my achievement, the first thing I want to say is building those 2 stations in the Galapagos. But the only thing I forget to say is that I haven't taken leave in the Galapagos to enjoy because I wanted to make sure that people don't think or didn't think that I was going there for holiday, but I was just going to build the station and then come up. So I'm still looking forward to going for holidays in the Galapagos. But anyway, thank you, thanks to you all for being here. One person who might complain is Pickingh, because Pickingh often is part of those who put together my speeches, and then they always talk about whether I use 10% or 50% or 60% of the speech. And I tell them, when I come in the room, when people talk before me, then your speech is over. Because I try to use what they say and then make another speech. But Pickingh, I'll try and be by 75% of your speech, and thank you for putting this together. But anyway, so we are in a world that is difficult, especially for those like me working in difficult tasks like trying to put together a framework, the political and technical framework for the entry into force of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. You've heard that despite securing 184 signature and 168 ratification, the treaty is yet to enter into force because of 8 remaining countries. And people wonder if the treaty will ever enter into force. And that's a question that many are asking me. I used to tell them if I didn't think I wouldn't be at the head of the CTBT, but now that Kevin said that I'm running for the IEA, you might think that it's because I think the CTBT will never enter into force, but no, it won't. And it will, because whether you are from the IEA perspective or any nuclear non-proliferation, arms control or disarmament, you should make sure that every aspect of those agreements are taken care of, and so that we get the CTBT into force, so that the NPT can be stronger, and then the nuclear non-proliferation norm is even stronger in our search to build the world free of nuclear weapons, and that's what we're trying to do. So, but the question we're asking ourselves today is how can the international community come together to rebuild trust? Maria Fernandez has talked about the deficit of trust. And then it's true, to rebuild trust and then to strengthen faith in multilateralism to confront the global challenges and thereby secure a more peaceful and prosperous world for the next generation. I mean, everybody's talking about the next generation today. And we have the CTBT youth group with nearly 800 young ladies and men who are advocating for this wonderful treaty. But if we didn't bring the young generation, we wonder, because they think that this is our world, but with communication means Twitter, Instagram, and I mean, there's some that I can't even name. I mean, the youth are not the next generation anymore. I call them the current generation, but they're the one basically dictating how we should work. Because if you're not on Twitter, you're not on Facebook, you have your kids at home, they come with things that you don't understand. So you have to let them basically lead, and then give them your smartphone to download an application for you and so forth, so that you can follow what's happening in the world. And this is the world we're living in. And at the same time, the world is interconnected by all those communication means, and then we still think that we're not communicating well enough, and that's what Maria Fernandez said. But I'm going to come to a point that I've noticed myself in traveling around trying to advocate for the CTBT. And you're absolutely right, Ms. Espinosa. I think communication is a big problem. And I'm going to talk, when you take the arms control and non-proliferation framework, you go to one of the developing countries, Burkina Faso, to name it. You go and try to advocate for the CTBT, and then you talk to high-level officials, whether you're in the Comoros or in the Gambia or in Equatorial Guinea. You advocate for the CTBT, and then you talk to the parliamentarian, and then in the end they say, oh yeah, we're ready to ratify the Prohibition Treaty. Okay? Because in your discussion, they think you talk about the Prohibition Treaty. People just don't make the difference between the CTBT, the NPT, the Prohibition Treaty, and then many of the international agreements that are on the making, or that are pending ratification or entry into force and so forth. We're not being fair to the developing world. And I'm saying we're not being fair because we're not communicating well enough. And we're not communicating well enough because simply we're bombarding the developing world with so many information at the same time on the same thing issue, which is non-proliferation and disarmament. You're taking from the Chemical Weapon Convention to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and then people are simply lost because they just don't have the resources like the developed world to try and suck the information in a way where they can use it and then to make good sense of it. And that's a big problem. And I've seen it everywhere. I was, last week, 2 weeks ago, when we were commemorating the 10th anniversary of the International Day Against Nuclear Testing, one ambassador came running to me and said, "Oh, Dr. Zeba, I'm so happy, on the 25th, we're ratifying your treaty." And then I said, "Thank you, but you've ratified already." He said, "No, but I'm talking about the Prohibition Treaty." Okay, so how do I deal with this? And this is one of the big problems that I've faced myself, and then I think communication should help deal with. But it's not only the smartphone, it's not only going, it's about working in a synergetic way where we link all aspects of non-proliferation and disarmament. I'll give an example. Whether you are from the IEA, the CTBTO, or OPCW, or the UN, I think any head of organization in the UN and affiliated United Nations organization should be able to talk about aspects that are not necessarily his, but that are linked. If a head of the agency is going somewhere in a country that has not ratified the CTBT, he should be able to talk about the ratification of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, because it is important. It is as important because linking it to his own issue, we can make a difference for the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And that's what I say, effective communication that is needed in this field. So opportunities and risks in the current geopolitical landscape. Communication is one of them. The importance of multilateralism in addressing global challenges. Ms. Fernandez talked about diplomacy. There is this concept that is not new, it's an old concept: science diplomacy, nuclear diplomacy, food diplomacy, or whatever, you name it. Why we say it's how we can bring science and technical aspect to drive the policy that we're trying to make. And that's something that we should focus on, bringing and bridging the gap between scientists and policymakers. And we don't do that well enough. We don't do it well enough because, we tend to live in our own cocoon where we think scientists are the master of ceremony. And then diplomats, as I often say, but I can't say this anymore, Kevin, because people think that I've been in one of the diplomatic corps. They forget that I was a scientist. And 15 years ago, they didn't think I could be a diplomat. So I'm now torn in between, and I'm happy to be called a diplomat because I still have the trick to use my science background to deal with the problem that they create. Because I often say, diplomats create a problem to try and solve it, and trying to solving it, they create another problem, to try and solve it, and then they create another problem. And I've dealt with efficient diplomats who have also taught me one major thing: to be patient. Because you don't hurry up in diplomacy. You have to wait for the right time to make your call, the right time to make things. But sometimes for a scientist it's difficult because we want to get things done just now and then we move on. And that's the difficulty that we have to deal with. But the only way to deal with is to bring science and policymakers to sit. When we talk about climate change and the threat from nuclear weapons today, those are the two existential threats that exist in this planet. But we can link them one way or another. When we talk about climate change, we should be able to bring that notion of what could be and what disaster, a nuclear bomb could do to the climate change itself. There are experts who are writing that after a nuclear bomb, we can have, a big change in terms of, the temperature for a certain period of time. Experts are talking about all those things that we should interconnect so that people see where we're coming from. And then we're not doing this well enough. And this is one of the biggest challenges that we will still face because we cannot continue making policy without getting the solid ground that is coming from the science. I was listening today to the young people in the climate action. Of course, my dear friend Kevin, I'm talking about activism. Activism is great. And activism is wonderful because it raises awareness. But after all, when we do the activism, what remains is probably what we didn't talk about. Because we're talking about advocacy. But we should bring the tangible fact to accompany the advocacy that we're doing. And that leads me to the example that I've been working on for the past 15 years. That's the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty itself. We mentioned the 300 plus facilities. I've seen no environment where science helped drive policy as better as the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Here's an organization where, to deal with this nuclear test issue, the 2000 nuclear tests and so that we talk about, they brought scientists from all over the place. First, US and Russia, because the Soviet Union, those are the two who dealt with nuclear weapons and then who could indeed deal with how to stop nuclear testing and then the science behind it. They brought them and then brought people as far as Senegal, young scientists to sit at a prototype in Virginia to reflect on how we can bring science to see how best we can look for a nuclear test explosion. And it this work for 40 years and plus that are led to the opening of signature of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, because indeed we came to a point where we brought technologies that could indeed verify that no nuclear test explosion will go undetected. But guess what? We did the science, we brought the treaty, we opened the treaty for signature, and then the treaty is yet to enter into force, and we tend to forget sustaining this wonderful infrastructure and the wonderful science behind this treaty. And that's the difficulty that we face. We have an organization setting that is working to perfection. We have experts from around the world, the best in their fields in Vienna, who are working day in and day out to contribute to your safety and security, because it's simply because of them that no nuclear test explosion would go unnoticed. They're making sure that you're safe in knowing what's happening in each corner of the planet, but also they're making sure that you get data that you can use for many other benefits, and then we can come to that in the discussion. And yet, we have a treaty, one of the organizations that people contribute the most to, because we have one of the organizations that's the most adhered to treaty. But not only this, our assessed contribution is over 95%. People wonder, a treaty that is not in force, and then an organization that is getting more than 95% of its contribution. You tell me, how many UN and UN affiliated organizations get this type of assessed contribution? Very little. But then, when I say this to any of the developing countries, people say, why? But they say, but Lassina, you're working for an organization that belongs to the big players. And that's why they're paying the contribution, because they need the information and they don't care about the treaty. And that's the biggest challenge that this organization is facing right now. Why having a strong infrastructure, a strong framework for the verification of the treaty, and not ratifying a treaty that could contribute to the whole NPT framework? You mentioned 8 countries that I'm not going to mention. Kevin, I think you're at the experience and age where you can do it without fear. But I still have a bit longer way to go, so I'll be careful about mentioning them. But anyway, we know who they are, and we have to make sure that we bring them through the science that drive the policy to tell them that, come on, you can't have this wonderful infrastructure, something that former Secretary of State John Kerry called the greatest accomplishment of the modern world. That's the international monitoring system. But why the greatest accomplishment of the modern world is suffering the entry into force of the treaty that is supposed to help verify. And that's a challenge that we have. But we are hopeful. We're hopeful because there's no other option. And that leads me to my last point, which is, if we do not, or if we cannot get the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty into force, what else can we do? What else can we do? The Prohibition Treaty is wonderful. What we want to achieve, it's a world free of nuclear weapons. But the CTBT is such a low-hanging fruit that my perception is, if we can't get this in our pockets, it will be hard to get any other treaty in arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament. So let's work in getting this. Let's combine the science that the CTBT is showing wonderful enough to verify an important treaty, and let's show that this is the example where we bridge the gap between people who traditionally don't talk to each other, and then that if we don't get this treaty into force, it will be more and more difficult to move on progress in non-proliferation and disarmament. And that's what we need, and the CTBT is one of them. I know Kevin wants me to be short. I'll stop here and then I'll take your question when we come. Thank you so much. 30 seconds.